And now I want to show you how you apply that technique to a speech outline. What you're looking at here is just a generic outline format that you could use for any speech, regardless of the pattern of organization you're using. That's why it's called generic. It's basically beginning, middle, end. So the beginning is what we were calling the introduction. It usually contains an attention grabber, and it usually ends with a statement of your main claim. The middle of your speech is the body, and it usually starts with a map of your complex argument. Now, I can't show you what that complex argument looks like because that's going to be different for every speech depending on what your pattern of organization is. But in general, you know that you have to support every subclaim you make with some type of either evidence or doxa or example or analogy. And that's what will constitute the body of your speech. And then finally, the conclusion is some version of a repetition of your main claim and then an appeal to your audience to change things. So that's what a generic outline format looks like for any speech. Finally, I'm going to show you how the mechanics of outlining are applied to a formal public speech with an actual example. Here's that speech outline I showed you before. I'm going to perform it for you so you can see how much to put in and leave out in the outline so that you can leave space for extemping on your performance day. Notice that I single spaced it. So this is just so you can see the whole thing on one screen. And also, I'm not using one of your patterns of organization here. It's just a simple universal 3-point argument. Okay, so I'm going to practice as though the instructor is just giving me the time cue and that I'm speaking in front of the class, and watch to see how I improvise from the outline. Right after I turned 16 and I could drive, I was driving around in the family car and I spotted a little stray puppy just kind of limping along on the side of the road. So I pulled over and I got him into the car and I took him over to the local Humane Society. And they took him up and took care of him. And I was sad to leave him. But then a few weeks later, our family dog Sammy died and we buried it. And eventually my family went to a pet store and we bought a collie because that was what Sammy was. But there was something gnawing in me about that experience, even though I wasn't quite sure why. And recently I've come to see that that was maybe a mistake, what my family did. And I want to make the case today to you that if you and I are in the same situation, we should make a different choice. I'm going to argue that shelters are better options than pet stores for buying family pets. Okay, so I'm going to do this in 3 stages. First, I'm going to say how store purchases mostly are not necessary, and then that the number of store purchases are disproportionate to the need. And then because this leads to a lot of euthanasias, that we need to change our consumer behavior. Okay, so first, adoption is better than store purchases for the most part. Now, there's obviously exceptions. If you're a professional dog breeder, you take pure breeds to shows and you may need to go to a store. But for most of us, it's not a quality issue anyway because people leave their dogs in shelters for human reasons, divorce or moving. That comes from the Humane Society, by the way, in an article called 10 Reasons to Adopt. Dogs of every quality are in the shelters, not just mutts. Now, shelter purchases are probably cheaper for the most part because they're nonprofit organizations and they will spay and vaccinate for free. That also comes from that Humane Society article. The most important reason to me, though, is a reason that comes from the Animal League of America in an article called Why Adopt? And it's because for-profit store purchases support what are called puppy mills. Now, puppy mills are these large-scale factory breeding operations. The dogs never leave their cages. They're in these cramped little factory spaces. They're forced to breed until they can't breed anymore. And as a result of all of that, they often get sick and they have to be put away anyway. So for that reason alone, I'm going to say it's better to purchase from a shelter. Now, my second point is that the current number of store purchases is directly related to the number of euthanasias. And euthanasia is just a fancy word for saying putting a dog to death with lethal chemicals. So the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals states that 31% of dogs entering shelters are euthanized. And in 2014, this comes from dogtime.com in an article called Adopt or Purchase, 34% of dogs are store purchased. If you put those two stats together, a third purchased from stores, a third euthanized, you get to the sense that this is an unjustified practice. Euthanasia, if you live in a civilized country, I'm just going to say, should be rare. And that 34% is equal to, and this is again an ASPCA figure, 1.2 million dogs euthanized per year. So it's pretty clear that not all these euthanizations are necessary. And if they're not, what we're doing is wrong. So the next time you want to get a dog, I want to encourage you to go buy it at a shelter. Thank you. So that's it. And if you were following along, you saw how I expanded and improvised from the outline, which is more of a blueprint or a recipe for performance. By the way, when you turn in your outline, be sure you have a works cited page at the bottom with citations for all the sources you referenced in your speech.